to start with how to go from a $1 million agent to a $5 million agent. So what I thought would be interesting and helpful would be able to look at the two different profiles, right? So a $1 million agent typically looks like this. Obviously $1 million in sales, at least an LDI agent will say $1 million in sales, 18 to 21% profit margins, which is $180,000 in gross profit. Typically a sole proprietor, one person, no real dedicated help typically. And then 5 to 10 active shippers, this is very typical, per month, where that are shipping with them on a regular basis. And 60 to 80% of their revenue comes from their top 3 shippers. They earn approximately $108,000 a year in commission. So that description right there, who here, can anybody relate to that? Does anybody feel that? Does anybody look like that? Okay. I figured there'd be a few because I knew who was coming, right? So the thing that you're not going to see a lot of is the other side of the coin, which is the $5 million agent. I mean, we are fortunate enough to have one here today. We'll talk a little bit about that in a while. But typically $5 million. The larger the agent, you will see sometimes a little bit of margin compression. So typically the margins are a little bit lower. And a $5 million agent will usually have anywhere between 3 and 8 full-time employees, depending on how they're operating, 20 to 50 active shippers per month, and but only 20 to 40% of their business will be leveraged to their top 3 shippers. So they're much more diversified. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit. That's a very important concept. And that agent obviously would earn a little over $500,000 a year in commissions, before his expenses, of course. So tell me, what's the big difference between those two models? Because there's a lot of agents that get to that $1 million, and that's kind of where they try to coast and stay in that range for their career. Unfortunately, usually doesn't work that way, right? Right? There's always the ebbs and flows of business. Customers come and go. And so tell me, what's the major difference between those two profiles?
Diversification.
Diversification is a huge one, yeah.
Having people work with you.
Having additional people work with you, right? What else? You got more shippers. You got more active shipper base, yeah. So those are obviously some of the differences. The key difference, to me, what ultimately ends up making the biggest difference, right, the cause and effect, is the team versus the solo business model, right? You got a solo operator that has a finite amount of bandwidth, right? They only have so many hours a day they can spend on the phone and the computer and talking to customers and talking to carriers and doing what we do. Versus a team where you learn to clone yourself a little bit. That's really the secret. So the first part of this is, the secret to that is obviously hiring and training people to do operations that allow you to focus on sales. So the key is to hire and train people to do the operations, allowing you, the agency owner, to focus in on sales. Secondly, you need to evaluate moving from your home office into an affordable commercial space as needed. Not everybody needs to do that. Some people live in a split-level house. Some people live in duplexes. Some people have outside access through a basement. There are different arrangements in different houses, but if you're working out of an extra bedroom in your house and people are going to be traipsing through your house, you got to think about it from two sides, right? Number one, do you really want that? Number two, are they comfortable with that? So that's a part you got to evaluate. Third, you have to evaluate and refine your sales system. Today we have an agent of ours who has a very, very successful sales system, who's going to spend a little bit sharing his information with you. We're going to do that a little bit later on, okay? Lastly, you have to diversify your customer base and increase market share with existing customers. And then number 5, the ever-present having to focus on customer satisfaction and retention. If you can't be what do they call it, a strainer, right? You put the water in, it falls right through. Doesn't work, right? I have a big Italian family. My wife calls it a sculabasta, right? So you don't want to be a sculabasta, right? You can't be that. It can't fall through. You got to retain it. By hiring people to handle operations, the operational components of being a broker, like covering loads and dispatching trucks and doing check calls and doing the day-to-day operational, very time-consuming, stressful, and having to be done on a regular basis, it allows the agents to free up an estimated, depending on the individual and the person that's working for them, anywhere from 15 to 30 hours a week to focus on growing their business. And where are they going to focus their time? Sales, right? They're the sales leader of that organization. You are the sales leaders of your organization. You can't take a back seat to that. Hiring a salesperson to grow your business from a sales perspective, in my opinion, is a mistake. It's not a mistake to hire them to help you grow your business, but you need to be the sales leader. You need to have your accounts. You need to develop your business. And you need to maintain that business. Anybody that else you bring on board is all supplement. Okay? So, secondly, when you hire people, so some of you have hired people, and some of you would be hiring people for the first time. It's a little intimidating, right? It's a little intimidating hiring somebody. Maybe you hired someone in another career or in a former life, but hiring people can be intimidating. Number one, where do I find the people? Right? How do I know I'm hiring the right person? How much am I supposed to pay them? Do I have to do them through payroll? Are they employees? Are they contract? It can be a little intimidating, right? So we can help you with that. But ultimately, when you're hiring people, my advice to you is this. I've hired, I don't know, a lot of people over the years, okay? We'll just put it that way. And I've made a lot of mistakes in hiring, okay? And it took me a long time to realize the right way to hire, okay? And you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. But what I always tell people is this. Hire on attitude first. Focus on attitude. People that have a good attitude, focus on that. That's absolutely first. You can get that in an interview if you learn how to interview for it. Secondly, focus on skills versus experience, okay? People have a tendency to look for people from this industry where they want somebody with trucking or logistics experience, which can work. But number one, when you limit yourself to that pool, it's a smaller pool. And number two, they can bring a lot of baggage with them, right? Good and bad. So my suggestion is focus on attitude, then focus on skills, then focus on their past experience if it's logistics or not. If you get all three of those, bam, home run, right? Now you should have a very high chance for success. All right? Lastly, you have to provide them a structured training program. I don't care if they're from the industry or not from the industry. It doesn't matter. You have to train them. You have to train them your way, and on the components of doing operations. And then the second piece is, what I strongly recommend is to provide them financial incentive that will allow them to make more by achieving more. So put them on some sort of performance incentive. Don't just put them on an hourly or a salary. That doesn't necessarily promote the type of performance that you're looking for. Try to put them on some sort of a commission structure or bonus structure that allows them, if they hit certain benchmarks, obviously to earn more. Because remember, they've got families. They got families too, right? They got to pay for college and they got to retire. They got to do all those things too. And as long as they're performing for you, be willing to pay them. You can never pay a good performer enough. Getting back to this, the key to transforming from a $1 million agent to a $5 million agent is you have to refine and look at your sales system. How are you approaching new business development? And that's obviously an important part of it. So the next piece is obviously you got to diversify your customer base and increase your market share in existing customers. And what that takes is flawless execution on your sales strategy daily. So it's not a sometimes thing, it's an everyday thing. Make sure you invest in your customer relationships by visiting them whenever possible. That will be something that will happen when you start bringing on staff to help you support your operations. It will free you and untether you from your office. It will allow you to do a little bit of travel, see your customers, which can be invaluable. Okay, and most customers don't get a lot of that with freight brokers because they're so tethered to their office. Obviously, focus heavily on customer satisfaction. First, you need to measure and understand your customer retention and turnover. If you don't know what your customer retention turnover ratios are, you need to dig into that and understand it. Then you need to identify the reasons why your past customers have turned over and plug those holes. Is it service related on late deliveries? Was it a claim? Is it competition? Did a contact turn over? Any number of reasons, right, of why they turned over. And then what's really critical is when there are those issues, when those trigger events happen, you know, a late delivery, a claim, a complaint on a driver, you know, the key to this, you have to immediately resolve that with the customer, and you got to confirm their satisfaction. Don't just let it fester. Don't just ignore it and say, well, he'll be all right, it's all right. You know, you got to get on the horn with him. You got to acknowledge the fact that you made a mistake, there was an issue, but you fixed it, and you're gonna, you'll improve on it. Another big thing, right, and that is marking your loads sat or unsat accurately. So when you deliver out a load, it says sat or unsat. Obviously, that just stands for satisfactory or unsatisfactory. If it picked up late or delivered late, there was a driver complaint or a claim, it's unsat. You want to be able to track that for two reasons. Number one, you want to be able to track it so that you can understand how good you are performing for your customers because you have access to that data. Those analytics are available. Secondly, every time you mark that, it will mark it on the carrier as a sat or unsat load. So anytime you go back and review that data on that carrier, you'll be able to see how many sat or unsat loads they've had compared to how many loads they've done with us, and you'll get a sense as to what their service level is. This is something that we've talked about before. You know, one of the phenomenons that I saw very early on in this business was most brokers get very, they put the blinders on and they get very centric on truckload. It's all truckload, 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 truckload. Don't want to talk about anything else. Truckload, truckload, truckload. That's all they want to do. And I'm all about focus, right? I'm a guy that doesn't like to operate like this too much. I like to be like this. I'm a little more narrow. But what I learned is that there's an incredible opportunity out there to service partial business. There's a lot of partial business out there. And a partial, you know, by our definition, you know, we're going to define a partial as something that's 5,000 pounds or more, but below a full truckload, usually more than 12 foot of space, which is different from an LTL, which is, you know, usually 1 to 5 skids and under 5,000 pounds. So where is partial freight? Almost every one of your truckload customers has either daily regular partials or at least partials periodically. Partials are a function of the size of a customer's order. So a lot of times you'll have partials that, you know, a lot of times customers will consolidate partials and make them truckload, multi-stop truckloads, but there's times when they can't do that and they have to still ship the goods. So those will become partials. The other time when you'll see a lot of partials is a lot of times when you see the economy set back a little bit, those truckload guys that were getting truckload orders will now cut their orders back and start buying partials, and then that stimulates more partial business. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Your customers won't even talk to you about partials unless you ask them. Because if they see you being full truckload centric, you know, they just automatically assume a lot of times that you don't want it. He's not asking about it, so I'm not gonna give him, you know, the lanes or the opportunities for partials. But if you start asking, you'll be shocked how much you'll get it.